Hello, welcome to Mostly Movies, where we mostly discuss movies, mostly. Today we're going to start with streaming, growth in the streams with HBO Max and Say Anything. This is a 1989 comedy directed by Cameron Crowe. Uh, Definitely one of my favorites. I haven't seen it in a number of years, but it's kind of part of that John Cusack, anti John Hughes genre, which he had kind of started with Better Off Dead, which is an amazing movie. One Crazy Summer is good. It's a little bit more traditional in its humor, like most 80s movies are. But what I liked about Say Anything is that every time it seems like it's going to go for the conventions, it sort of takes another turn and becomes a different movie. It's good to pair this one with another great John Cusack film, High Fidelity, which kind of does the same thing but for more adult oriented romantic comedies. But both movies on the surface appear to be traditional Hollywood stories. But as you watch them, they kind of play out a little differently. Okay, next up on streaming is Chippendale's Rescue Rangers. Now, this was a movie that I wasn't 100% interested in seeing when they were first making it. But then when I heard that they were going for this whole Roger Rabbit vibe about basically going through this whole Toontown route, that's what got me really interested in seeing it. I was a bigger fan of DuckTales and Tailspin when it comes to the Disney afternoon, but I did watch Rescue Rangers when it was first on. In fact, I still have the NES game, which I was quite good at back in the day. I recently tried to play it, and after 1 hour and several obscenities, I decided to let the past stay in the past. But as for this film, there are really cool references. There are genuinely big laughs. The story's a little bit thin, but I think that this movie has enough heart to for me to recommend it. There was an opportunity to go a little different. Far be it for Hollywood to do something different or really break new ground. But then they sort of went the traditional route when it came to the villain because, spoilers, I think it would have been an interesting move to make Ellie the mastermind behind it all. And it felt a little tired and boring that they had to just basically cop out and say, no, no, she can't be the bad one. I would have liked it. I thought it would have been very interesting. See, what made movies of the 70s and 80s interesting, and the problem that we have today as far as storytelling goes, is that we would get those surprises and they would try to do things a little differently. Whereas today, everything is always traditional. And they think by saying that they're being traditional, by making a comment on it, that it's some kind of meta joke. But I don't know. I like it when movies try to do things differently. So that one's worth seeing. Next up, we have on Tubi, which is the People's Streamer, we have a great episode of Masters of Horror. This is an anthology that was from cable back in 2005. And this is season 1, episode 8. It's called Cigarette Burns. It was directed by John Carpenter. And I consider it to be one of his great later works. A lot of people we all love John Carpenter's 70s and 80s stuff. I still like his 90s stuff. I know a lot of people wrote him off in the 90s, but not me. I think he was still making interesting work at that time. But Cigarette Burns is by far the most interesting thing he made after the 80s. I think that this is really a chance for him to really kind of show you, yes, I'm still that guy that made Halloween and Prince of Darkness. I can still do it. The story is about Norman Reedus, who plays a film collector looking for a movie called La Fin Absolue du Monde, which means the absolute end of the world. Supposed to be the most horrific movie ever made. It was screened only once, and the theater erupted in violence and death. What is so compelling about this film is that Reedus is dealing with his own demons as much as he's dealing with looking for the film and the pursuit of this film. He's trying to purge a great loss from his life. But what the movie is basically all about, it's all about obsession. And the trick to obsession is that it need not be purged away. It just is something that we have to learn to let go. I also enjoyed the music of Cody Carpenter, which was very minimalist, like the way his father would do back in the day. And it's interesting that to this day, Cody is still working. He did the music for the newer Halloween movies. So this is definitely worth checking out. Word of warning, this is very gory. It's not your usual John Carpenter, which deals usually more in suspense than blood. But it is also one of John's very best. A Twilight masterpiece, as far as I'm concerned. So horns up for all three of those movies. Now, next up, we have From the Vault, where we're going to cover something from physical media that I got from here in the shelves in the Serial Video Archive. So the first film that we're talking about today will be Terry Gilliam's Brazil. This is a startling version of the future that becomes more and more reality each day. On the surface, if you judge it by Terry's earlier work, you think, oh, what is this? Monty Python's 1984. But this film is actually maybe closer to reality than George Orwell's book, which Terry's said to have never read. 1984 predicted a dystopian future governed by an evil ruling class, what Orwell could not predict is that the future, as we see it, is full of grotesquerie and severe incompetence that run hand in hand with totalitarianism. It's a vain, shallow society where individual freedom is wrapped up in trivial pages of endless paperwork. The great irony is that this great and terrifying society is undone by the simplest of things. Basically, the story's set in motion because a fly lands in a typewriter. See, I first saw this film when I was about 13. It was around the same time I saw Blade Runner, Dr. Strangelove, and a few other movies that I was too young to get at the time. And over the years of growing and watching a lot more movies and some conversations with my movie mentors, in this case, Chris Bly and Christian Lauro, who were big Brazil fans, they were kind of the ones that said, made me think, you know what, maybe there's something more to this movie. Maybe there's something that I'm not seeing. So I saw it later on. I would believe I'd be in my late 20s. And when I had seen it, it seemed like an all-new movie. So I went out and bought the spiffy Criterion box set, which has the amazing European cut, which is about 10 minutes longer than the theatrical cut. The theatrical cut is streaming right now on Peacock. Definitely worth seeing. It's pretty much the same movie. The Euro cut is about 10 minutes longer. And there were certain changes in it that I really admire. It has a great commentary, featurettes, the Battle of Brazil documentary, which talks about all the clashes Gilliam had with the studio while making the film. And then there's also the infamous 90-minute alternate cut called the Love Conquers All version, where the studio basically made a happy ending for the film. I don't know, they did the same thing to Blade Runner, funny enough. Blade Runner doesn't have a happy ending or a sad ending, it just kind of ends. And the studio was not happy. They said, this is confusing and audiences are going to like it. But the 80s were obsessed with happy endings. There's a period of time, which I call the Civ 80s. This is 1967 to 1981. It's a mixture of the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where a movie could end on a down note and still be a big hit with an audience. For example, Raiders of the Lost Ark does not have a happy ending. Raiders of the Lost Ark just ends. And that's it. To whereas Temple of Doom, for all the dark stuff, for all the ripping hearts out and violence in that film, it basically ends with Indy getting the girl and being embraced by a bunch of kids. And Last Crusade, also a great film, but it ends off with a nice ride into the sunset with Indy and his dad. And the Crystal Skull, Indy gets married. But I digress. We're talking about Brazil. The beauty of this film is that it seems to have, even though it has a downbeat ending, even though it has this ending where you feel, oh, that's kind of a bummer, the point of this film is that even if we lose everything, even our own mind, somehow our spirit can find a way to be free. So it's definitely worth checking out. I would say don't go out and buy the expensive Criterion set. I would say watch it on Peacock or rent it off iTunes or something and give it a look. And if you like it, then, by all means, I recommend the Criterion edition. I was going to get the Blu-ray, but now I'm waiting for the 4K. Okay, and we're going to end with a new segment called $5 Film Club. This is about discount screenings happening in New Jersey and other parts of the country. If you follow, the link will be in the description for flashbackcinema.net. They play a variety of classic films every Sunday and Wednesday. I've been a big patron of this for the past, I would say, 10 years. It's a great, great program that they run. And I'm lucky enough to have a theater near me that does it. So we're going to talk about a film I just saw again recently in theaters, and I've seen many, many times, and that is Richard Donner's The Goonies. Okay. One of my favorite films, I have to say it. It's funny. This came out the same year as Back to the Future and Brazil, which are superior films in many, many ways. Yet when I had to decide what's my favorite film of 1985, it's this movie. It's this really silly upstart film with a bunch of kids, and they're all talking over each other, and it just has such a charm to it. It has such a spirit to it that you just gotta love this movie. Critics at the time dismissed it for all the general conventions. But what really struck me about this film, a lot more than most movies, I would say even more than like E.T., is that the kids, like E.T., but maybe even a little more so, the kids really seem like real kids. It doesn't seem like these are great, phenomenal actors. Like the kids in E.T. were great actors. Nothing against these guys, they're good, but they just seem more natural. They seem like these are kids that live on your block. And that was something that was very refreshing, especially seeing it at a young age. I was about five and change when I saw it in theaters. Originally, I like the way that there's scenes where the kids just talk nonsense or they talk over each other. It's sort of like Robin Altman for kids. See, what the producer Steven Spielberg continues in the tradition of Jaws, Close Encounters, Poltergeist, E.T., Gremlins, Back to the Future is that he really captures that boomer ruled suburbia in such a beautiful way. He didn't direct the film. The movie was basically his story. Some of the elements in there were from real childhood, especially the theater prank that Chunk pulled was something that Spielberg had allegedly done as a kid. But it's the sincerity and it's the heart of this film that really wins one over. Um, I loved it as a kid, and even now through adult eyes, there's not a bit of it. And you can't say this about many 80s films. There's a lot of 80s films I watch now that I loved as a kid, and I still love, but there's a couple moments to make you go, eh. But there's nothing like that in this. Like this movie, from top to bottom, to me anyway, holds up wonderfully. There was a video game in the arcades, which was pretty cool. Then they made a sequel on the NES. Um, I did play it a long time ago, and I recently played it again, and it was like most games of that day. It was quite stressful. There's no official sequel to the Goonies. However, on this very channel, the Siri Poetry Library, there's a poem series in the playlist called Goondock Saints. If you want a sequel to the Goonies, it's there. Is it perfect? No, but it's a lot better than any of these 35 years too late sequels that come out of Hollywood these days can cook up. Part of the reason why we're getting sequels to like Top Gun and all these properties that are so old is that Hollywood is so out of ideas that the only way they're going to get people my age into the theater is to make a sequel to Top Gun or to make another Indiana Jones movie. Because other than some Marvel movies, not even all of them, because not all Marvel movies really get me out of the house. The only way to get most people my age into the theater is to make sequels to properties that are over 30 or 40 years old. And, Tom Cruise still looks pretty good, so you could still make a Top Gun movie. But honestly, it's like I really wish Hollywood would try to come up with something new and original. Um, I'm glad there's no sequel to the Goonies. I don't want to see one. I'm not interested in because by this point you'd have to be telling a story about their grandchildren. It would be like the last Ghostbusters, which, all right, I did love that movie, but you feel really old where you're not even telling a movie about the Ghostbusters kids. You've been gone so long, you have to tell a story about their grandkids, and that just makes me feel kind of old, to be honest with you. But just everybody have a great week. I'll try and get another video done soon. I try to have something planned for the end of school in 2 weeks. Usually Dazed and Confused. That's usually the film I watch every last day of school. I come home from work and I put on Dazed and Confused, because it's a great end of school type of movie. So everybody have a great week, and remember, it's our time on YouTube.